This operation is strictly compartmentalized. You know your orders.
Ma'am, this area is for brief attendees only, the young lieutenant said. He extended his palm outward, a gesture more fitting for stopping traffic than addressing an officer of higher rank. Lieutenant Commander Amelia Wilson gave no visible sign of reaction. She calmly completed the task of filling a small cup with coffee, executing each motion with deliberate efficiency. The secure, windowless briefing chamber, a sensitive compartmented information facility, SKIF, was filled with the low, steady hum of projection equipment and climate control. A cluster of high-ranking personnel, including Air Force colonels, Marine majors, and Navy captains, were taking their places at the large, polished mahogany conference table, their quiet conversations immediately fading as they observed the unfolding exchange. Amelia set the ceramic cup down on the counter. "I am an attendee, Lieutenant," she stated, her voice perfectly level and low, devoid of any aggressive inflection. The young lieutenant's jaw clenched. His uniform was immaculate, and his bearing was overly eager, marking him as someone who prioritized regulations over real understanding. He visually dismissed the rank insignia on her collar and the gold wings on her chest, focusing instead on her green flight suit, her face, and her hair neatly confined in a service bun. His expression carried the absolute conviction of a man whose initial snap judgment was now rigid fact. "Spouses and administrative staff aren't cleared for this brief," he asserted, raising his voice slightly, seemingly to impress the senior officers who were now watching. "I'm going to have to ask you to wait outside." He hadn't bothered to inquire about her identity, having already mentally categorized the woman standing by the coffee machine. Amelia finally pivoted to face him directly. Although not physically imposing, her bearing commanded attention, giving her an air of unwavering stability, her clear, composed blue eyes fixed on his. "There must be a misunderstanding," she stated, her politeness maddeningly persistent. The lieutenant stiffened. "The only misunderstanding, ma'am, is your presence in this skiff," he retorted, gesturing emphatically toward the secure entry door. "If you lack the proper clearance, you are compromising the integrity of this entire facility. I need to see your credentials now." This demand was a transparent power move designed to publicly challenge and embarrass her. Every officer in the room had already undergone rigorous security vetting at the main entry point, making this specific demand a personal, unwarranted audit. Amelia calmly reached into the shoulder pocket of her flight suit and retrieved her Common Access Card, CAC. She extended it toward him. The lieutenant accepted the card, his fingers briefly brushing hers. As his eyes scanned the credentials, a momentary flash of confusion registered on his face. The card clearly displayed LCDR Wilson next to her photo, confirming her as a Lieutenant Commander, 04. As an 02, Lieutenant Junior grade, he was outranked by 2 pay grades. He should have immediately returned the card with a flustered apology, his embarrassment evident. Instead, his initial certainty solidified into raw suspicion. He lifted the CAC to the light, as if scrutinizing a complex fake. "This could be an admin error," he mumbled, directing the comment more to himself. "Records get mixed up frequently during PCS season." He flipped the card, meticulously inspecting the magnetic strip and the chip, feigning expertise on their security mechanisms. "Lieutenant," Amelia interjected, her voice lowering slightly, "my card is valid." He defiantly countered, "That remains to be seen." His pride now irrevocably bound to this escalating blunder, he strode to a security terminal near the door, a rarely used secondary checkpoint, observed by a Marine gunnery sergeant who was watching the scene with profound, weary familiarity. "I'm going to need to run a full verification," the lieutenant announced to the room, exaggerating his authority as if exposing a massive security failure. We can't be too careful. He slid Amelia's card into the terminal and began typing, his actions needlessly aggressive and loud in the contained quiet of the room. The other officers were now openly staring. A silver-haired Air Force colonel subtly shook her head in disapproval, and a Navy captain cleared his throat, broadcasting a low rumble of censure. The lieutenant, entirely consumed by his self-appointed mission, was oblivious to the freezing social atmosphere. "It says here you're naval aviation," he observed, scrutinizing the screen, before turning to Amelia with a dismissive smirk. "Public affairs, I assume? Or maybe meteorology? They issue flight suits to a lot of support staff these days." This was a calculated insult, aimed not just at questioning her presence, but at invalidating her entire professional existence and the uniform she wore. He implied that even if she was an officer, she was a non-essential one, not a true pilot. Amelia's gaze momentarily dropped to the golden wings stitched on her olive-drab suit. They were subtly faded and worn, the threads frayed from the constant abrasion of survival vests and parachute harnesses. For a brief moment, the skiff dissolved. The hum of the air conditioning was replaced by the deafening roar of General Electric F414 engines at full afterburner. The mahogany table vanished, replaced by a rain-streaked, salt-sprayed plexiglass canopy. She wasn't on carpet. She was strapped into a NASA's ejection seat, bracing for the controlled violence of her FA-18 Super Hornet, hitting the USS George H.W. Bush's deck during a midnight landing in the North Atlantic. Decelerating from 150 mph to 0 in 2 seconds was a terrifying dance of physics and courage. Those wings were not decoration. They were a hard-won testament, forged in fear and darkness, representing a mastery she had bled to achieve. "Something wrong, Commander?" the lieutenant inquired, his voice coated with patronizing concern, mistaking her momentary stillness for a crack in her resolve. Before Amelia could respond, a Marine colonel, seated midway down the table, leaned forward. His face was a map of deep lines etched by decades of sun and operational stress. He had been studying Amelia intently since the confrontation began, sensing a familiar connection he couldn't immediately place. Then, his eyes fixed on a small, circular patch positioned just below the American flag on her right shoulder. It was the insignia of Strike Fighter Squadron 154, the Black Knights, a skull wearing a knight's helmet. Recognition slammed into him. The colonel remembered a dusty field command post in Afghanistan's Helmand province. He recalled a desperate radio plea for close air support, CAS. His platoon was pinned down by a fortified machine gun position. He distinctly remembered the calm, steady voice of the flight lead in the Super Hornet that had materialized out of the sun like an avenging angel. "Gunslinger, this is Spectre 1. I have eyes on the target. Tell your boys to keep their heads down." He remembered the jet's scream, the ground-shaking precision of the ordnance hitting the ridge, and the immediate, blessed silence that followed. He looked at Amelia again, truly seeing her now, and he knew. This was no administrative officer. This was Spectre 1. The Marine colonel's hand moved smoothly and discreetly toward the smartphone resting on the table. Shielding the screen with his free hand, his thumb rapidly composed a short, urgent message directed at Rear Admiral Vance's flag aide, the one person capable of neutralizing this escalating catastrophe. The message was terse. "Sir, you need to get the Admiral down to the main briefing room. Now. The JG is trying to throw Spectre Wilson out." The phone instantly vibrated with the flag aide's bewildered reply. "Who?" The colonel quickly typed back. "The Spectre, VFA 154, the one from the Kandahar extraction. Get him here." A few miles away, Inside the quiet, wood-paneled office of the Commander Naval Air Forces Atlantic, Rear Admiral Marcus Vance was examining a logistics report. His sharp-featured flag aide entered the office, holding his phone out like a critical dispatch. "Admiral," the aide reported, his voice tight with urgency. "You need to see this." Vance, slightly annoyed by the disruption, took the device and read the text exchange. His eyes widened marginally at the name. Spectre Wilson. It was a name that resonated deeply, carrying the weight of highly sensitive after-action reports and major award citations. "Wilson?" Vance stated, looking up at his aide. "Amelia Wilson is here?" "Apparently, sir," the aide confirmed, "and a lieutenant junior grade is creating a procedural issue." Vance instantly understood the gravity of the situation when a decorated female aviator and an overzealous junior officer were involved in a procedural issue. Vance required no further detail. He threw the phone back to his flag aide and rose abruptly, his chair grating loudly across the wooden floor. He walked swiftly to his personal terminal, his fingers flying across the keyboard with unexpected speed for a man his age. He immediately called up Amelia Wilson's service record. The screen illuminated with a career history that read like the perfect recruitment brochure. The Distinguished Flying Cross, 8 air medals, over 3,000 flight hours, 912 carrier-arrested landings, more than 200 of them conducted in total darkness. She was a Top Gun graduate, call sign Spectre, and had served as the flight lead during the mission that successfully extracted a SEAL team under heavy fire near Kandahar. Her recent assignment was as an instructor, mentoring the new crop of fighter pilots on survival in the planet's most dangerous operational environment. Vance stared at the glowing screen for a long moment, a storm brewing in his expression. He studied her official photograph, noting the same steady, resolute eyes he remembered from her last award ceremony. A surge of protective fury washed over him, quickly followed by profound pride. "Get my cover," Vance commanded his aide, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "And tell the Master Chief he's coming with us." This was no longer about correcting a young lieutenant. It was about protecting the honor of one of his service's absolute finest. Back in the briefing room, the lieutenant had reached the peak of his monumental error. He logged out of the terminal, having failed to find a single fault with her credentials, yet refusing to concede defeat. He marched back toward Amelia, holding her KAC card delicately between his thumb and forefinger, as if it were contaminated. "While your credentials appear to be in order for base access, Commander," he declared, heavily layering the title with sarcasm, "your clearance for this specific briefing is not registering. It is likely an administrative oversight you'll need to take up with your command." He was fabricating regulations on the spot, sinking deeper with every word. "So, for the very last time, I am going to have to ask you to leave. If you refuse, I will have security escort you from the premises. We can also discuss the fraudulent wear of aviation insignia if you'd like to continue pushing this." The accusation hung in the dead air, a toxic, unforgivable offense. Impersonating an officer was a felony. Fraudulent wear was a profound desecration of honor. The room fell into an unnatural stillness, the background hum of the electronics seeming to vanish. Even Amelia's formidable composure finally fractured. The flicker in her eyes was not anger, but a deep, weary sorrow. She had navigated thunderstorms, evaded surface-to-air missiles, and landed on a moving ship in pitch darkness, all while wearing that uniform. And here, surrounded by her peers in a climate-controlled room, she was being told it was a costume. It was at that precise, emotionally charged moment that the main doors to the briefing room burst open with a resounding thud. Every officer in the room, regardless of their rank or service branch, shot instantly to their feet. Standing in the doorway was Rear Admiral Vance, his 2-star flag gleaming on his collar. Flanking him were his captain aide and the fleet master chief, a man whose chest was so densely covered with ribbons it resembled a walking history textbook. They didn't just enter the room, they claimed it. Their combined presence instantly shifted the facility's center of gravity. The young lieutenant froze mid-motion, his mouth half open, Amelia's ID card still clutched in his hand. His face, which had been set in a mask of arrogant certainty, instantly crumbled into a canvas of pure, unadulterated terror. He looked like someone who had just realized the bear he was poking was, in fact, a nuclear submarine. Admiral Vance's gaze swept over the scene, taking in the stiffly standing officers, the petrified lieutenant, and Lieutenant Commander Amelia Wilson standing alone by the coffee station, looking more like she was facing a firing squad than attending a meeting. Vance walked past the lieutenant as if he were an inconsequential piece of furniture, his eyes locked solely on Amelia. The Master Chief followed, his expression thunderous. Vance stopped directly in front of her, the stars on his shoulders radiating under the fluorescent lights. The silence in the room was absolute, a palpable pressure. He did not immediately salute. A small, wry smile touched his lips. "Spectre," he said, his voice quiet but carrying clearly to every corner of the room. "I was wondering when you were going to grace us with your presence. It's been too long." The call sign, her aviation name, her warrior identity, echoed in the stillness like a thunderclap. The young lieutenant flinched as if struck. Vance then turned to address the entire assembly, his voice immediately assuming a commanding tone. "For those of you who haven't had the privilege," he began, his eyes sweeping over the assembled officers before finally settling like twin lasers on the petrified lieutenant. "Allow me to introduce Lieutenant Commander Amelia Wilson. She has over 900 traps on a carrier deck, which, for you Air Force and Marine folks, is like attempting to land a fighter jet on a postage stamp in a hurricane, at night." A low, tension-breaking chuckle rippled through the room. She was the lead pilot on the strike package that eliminated the insurgent command and control bunker in the Korengal Valley, a mission that saved the lives of 17 Army Rangers. Furthermore, after a catastrophic engine failure and partial hydraulics loss, she managed to bring her crippled Super Hornet back to the boat instead of ejecting, thereby saving the Navy a $60 million aircraft. She accomplished that with visibility under a quarter mile. The Distinguished Flying Cross she was awarded for that piece of airmanship is, in my opinion, the least we could do. With every achievement listed, the lieutenant visibly deflated, his face utterly devoid of color. He was no longer just mistaken. He was catastrophically, historically wrong, and was learning this bitter lesson in front of the base's most powerful leadership. She has forgotten more about carrier aviation and strike tactics than most people in this room will ever learn, Vance concluded, his voice ringing with indisputable authority. He then turned back to face Amelia, his posture shifting from that of a disciplinarian to an officer greeting a highly respected peer. He snapped a salute so precise it could have sliced glass. "Welcome to the brief, Commander," he said, his tone conveying genuine, deep respect. "We need your expertise on the Iranian interdiction scenarios." Amelia's back straightened. The fatigue in her eyes vanished, replaced by a familiar fire. She returned the salute with equally crisp precision. "Glad to be here, Admiral." The transfer of authority and public vindication were absolute. Vance then let his gaze finally drop to the young lieutenant. The Admiral's voice reverted to a low, chilling calm. "Lieutenant," he stated, causing the young man to flinch. "Report to my office at 1500 with your commanding officer. You and I are going to have a detailed conversation about situational awareness, professionalism, and the United States Navy's core values of honor, courage, and commitment, which you seem to have misplaced. He did not need to raise his voice. The quiet fury was far more terrifying. He plucked the CAC card from the lieutenant's numb fingers and returned it to Amelia. "Admiral," Amelia said, stepping slightly forward. Her voice was steady, revealing none of the emotional turmoil she must have been feeling. "With all due respect, the lieutenant was attempting to follow security protocol. His execution was flawed, but the principle of vigilance is sound. The standard is the standard for a reason." She looked at the young man, not with anger, but with a kind of detached disappointment. The standard just has to be applied fairly to everyone, every time, regardless of what you think you see. It was a masterclass in grace. She was not demanding an apology or retribution. Instead, she was reinforcing the ideal that the institution was more vital than any individual's ego, including her own. She was teaching, even in that moment, about the unblinking, impartial application of rules. Another memory flashed brightly across her mind, more vivid than the last. She was back in the cockpit, not landing this time, but launching. The catapult officer on the deck below gave the final salute. The world instantly dissolved into a blur of controlled, violent acceleration. In under 2 seconds, her aircraft hurtled from 0 to 165 mph. The crushing G-forces were immense, but her hands remained steady on the controls, her eyes instantly scanning the instruments, her mind already several steps ahead, entirely focused on mission execution. That was the standard. Absolute, flawless perfection, every single time, because lives depended on it. Those golden wings represented a sacred trust, a trust the young lieutenant had entirely failed to recognize. The institutional fallout was immediate, yet nuanced. Lieutenant Peterson was not expelled, but he was relieved of his command position and reassigned to a logistics billet, a role where his capacity to embarrass the Navy would be significantly limited. Admiral Vance swiftly mandated a command-wide refresher on equal opportunity and leadership training, utilizing a carefully anonymized version of the incident as a critical case study on unconscious bias. He also launched a new mentorship initiative, pairing junior officers with seasoned mid-career officers like Amelia, hoping to cultivate the understanding that regulations alone could not instill. A few weeks later, Amelia was grocery shopping at the base commissary after a long day in the simulator when she heard a tentative voice behind her. "Commander Wilson?" She turned to find Lieutenant Peterson. In civilian clothes, and without his starched uniform and rigid posture, he appeared younger and much smaller. His face was pale, his gaze fixed on the floor. "Lieutenant," she acknowledged, her tone neutral. He finally met her eyes, which held genuine remorse. "Ma'am, Commander, I just wanted to say I'm sorry. There is no excuse for my behavior in the briefing room. It was unprofessional, disrespectful, and completely out of line. I was wrong. And thank you for what you said to the Admiral. You didn't have to do that." Amelia studied him for a moment. She could see the shattered pride, but beneath it, a nascent flicker of humility. "We all make mistakes, Lieutenant," she said, her voice softening slightly. "The important thing is what we do next. Learn from this. The next time you see a uniform, see the sailor, not your assumption of them. See the rank they earned, the insignia they bled for." He nodded, swallowing hard. "I will, ma'am. I promise." She offered him a small, tight smile. "Good. Now go buy your groceries. And, Lieutenant." He looked up, startled. "Tuck your shirt in." A trace of the old Spectre's playful authority returned to her eyes. He looked down, embarrassed to see his t-shirt untucked, and quickly fixed it. It was a small, simple course correction. a seed of mentorship planted in the unlikely soil of a public humiliation. The story of Lieutenant Commander Spectre Wilson is a powerful reminder that heroes wear many faces, and valor isn't always found in the cockpit of a fighter jet. Sometimes it's found in the quiet dignity of standing your ground. If you were inspired by her story, please like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to She Chose Fortitude for more incredible stories honoring our women in uniform.